Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to the first FSRA Florida virtual meeting Zoom webinar. Today's program will be hearing from our board chairman, Mike Borstein, who will tell us a little bit about future activities and updates for FSRA. And we'll be hearing from our featured speaker, Dr. Gary Marmino. At the end of his presentation, also all participants will have an opportunity. Before we get into the program, what I'd like to do now is turn things over a little bit to Rebecca Armand and let her cover some very important how-tos that I think will help folks navigate through this Zoom webinar setting. So over to you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Larry. So for those of you that are new to this, let me just do a couple of quick things. You are not going to be able to ask questions verbally or start video for yourself on the webinar. There is a Q&A button, should be toward the bottom of your screen. At any point during the presentation, please feel free to draft some questions and shoot them forward to us. We will see them as you type them, and we will figure out how to answer them, whether it's during the presentation, if that's an appropriate place, or if it's at the end. Beyond that, there's not much that you can do, and we hope that you enjoy the presentation.
Great, thanks, Rebecca. So Mike, let me turn it over to you. Please unmute yourself.
Okay, good, I'm unmuted. Good morning, everybody. I'm really thrilled that we have this virtual meeting today, and it's a chance to see who's participating and to bring everybody up to date on what the board's been doing in our virtual environment. We have had 2 board meetings since the pandemic, actually 3. We had one in April, one in June, and one in September. And so clearly we did not plan for any in-person meetings. We canceled the one at the Villages in March. We stopped the planning for the one in Bonita Springs in May, and we really haven't look to do any other. So it looks like for the foreseeable future, this is our world. We do want to have an annual general meeting in June, probably the 3rd week, which is required under the Constitution, and I'll get back to that shortly. In terms of membership, we have increased by 35 people. We now are 420 members strong. And part of that increase is attributed to a mailing that was done by my wife, Sue Borstein, who's the treasurer, to reach out to those members of AFSA who live in Florida who were not members of FSRA. And out of 225 mailings, we got about 25 new members that otherwise would not have signed up. And we got about another 10 just out of the blue who said they wanted to be interested in being members. So, you know, we'll keep after people whenever we have an opportunity to do so. We also send out mailings to those members who have not paid their dues dating back to 2019 to remind them in particular that if they don't pay for at least 2020 and going forward to 2021, they will be dropped from the 2021 directory. So a few of those people have sent in their dues and more to come. So we'll do another reminder towards the end of the year. In terms of a newsletter, we hope to put one out sometime in November to give updates to people and to highlight those who have passed, and there's been a few of those, and to continue to look for ideas for future webinars such as this with speakers in the absence of new, the ability to meet in person. Rebecca Armand has paid some attention to our website, and as you all know by now, the address for our website has changed to make it simpler, and we'll continue to look for improvements. In terms of activities that we've done, to make us more in accordance with the Constitution is Alan von Egman is now the chair of the nominating committee. And basically the way we want this to work in January at the AGM is to present to you a slate of candidates, not for specific officers, but for the board in terms of the advisors. And we are going to propose a constitutional change that will make all the advisors directors. So we have a maximum of 14 directors, and out of those 14, with the approval by the annual general meeting, those directors will then select the officers, that is president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer. So those things will require some constitutional changes. Some of them are like, housekeeping. We need to regularize the backup treasurer so that it's not me as the board chair, but it will be someone else on the board. And that someone else will be Jeff Olison. And that change should take place sometime in the next week or two. A number of other changes that will be sent out in the newsletter. So I'm not going to go over them specifically now, but it represents a lot of work by a constitutional subcommittee of the board that Frank Young has taken the lead. And so we're at a point where we can present those to the board probably in December. And I believe that is it for my update. We continue to work in a Zoom environment. It's working pretty well. We now have Joyce Fitzpatrick as our secretary, and she will have to advise the nominating committee if she wants to continue as secretary or not. So we will keep you apprised as to that. So I'm going to turn it now back to Larry to continue the webinar with Professor Mormino. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Mike. I'd like to introduce our featured speaker today, Dr. Gary Marmino, who is the Frank Duckwall Professor Emeritus at History at the University of South Florida in St. Petersburg. He's also the scholar in residence at the Florida Humanities Council. Professor Mormino is an award-winning author with many works on social history and fascinating subjects. His 2005 work, The Land of Sunshine, State of Dreams, A Social History of Modern Florida, was adopted for the PBS documentary, The Florida Dream, which received a regional Emmy. He's also been honored by the Florida House in Washington, D.C. for his literary accomplishments and was a recipient of the Florida Humanities Council Lifetime Achievement in Writing. So with great pleasure, I bring you Professor Gary Marmino. So over to you, Gary.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. In fact, it's fascinating that my career took an abrupt turn in 1980 when I was at the American Embassy Library in Rome. So I spent the 1980, I'm from the Midwest, from the Illinois side of St. Louis, Wood River, if anyone's ever been there. Had a large Italian community, Little Italy. And so I was kind of fascinated as a young grad student with Italian immigrants. And I was working on a couple projects in 1980 when I was a Fulbright scholar at the Università di Roma in Rome, Italy. I was working on Italian immigrants in St. Louis, but also Tampa, very different communities. Be interested if any of you have ever been to the Hill in St. Louis, home of Joe Garagiola and Yogi Berra, or Ybor City in Tampa. But I spent the year there, and every Saturday I would go into the American Library on Via Veneto and look at the International Herald. And after a few months, I realized when I returned to the US, I was going to kind of change my professional direction. That 1980-81 was a year resident with anyone stationed in Latin America. It was the Mariel boat lift. It was the Miami riots. It was the English-only referendum. An astonishing year. Election of Reagan, release of the Iranian hostages. And so I vowed when I returned, I realized that the most exciting thing probably in my life is going to be Florida. That every single day, Florida was adding about 500 to 1,000 new residents. And if you wanted to study immigration, there was no shortage of immigrants in Florida. So when I came back, I finished the 2 books on immigration. So I'm now going to take you through kind of an overview of Florida. And if we could advance to the next slide, please. So this is an interesting way. So imagine it's 1940, and I'm addressing in person, obviously, the Foreign Service Association. And I tell you, I can predict the future. And the prediction, I'm going to predict the future of Florida. Next, please. And which of the following predictions, auguries, would have seemed the zaniest in 1820 or 1920 or 1940? Next, please. That you could survive an August evening in Miami or Tallahassee without sweating or swatting. The impact of air conditioning was nothing short of revolutionary. I'm guessing anyone who's retired in Florida today would not be there without air conditioning. People manage quite well to live without air conditioning, but it's impossible to imagine Florida as a senior magnet. And it's interesting, the first air conditioners came in the early 1950s. The real revolution was the Carrier model, window model. Up to that time, it was very, very expensive. And what's fascinating is the first time there's any analysis of this is the 1960 census. The census asked homeowners, do you have air conditioning in your home? And only 1 in 5 census responders said yes. 1 in 5 is not a revolution. It was still expensive, but by 1970 census, it was something like 70%. So it's revolutionary. There's a fascinating lawsuit, by the way, in Hollywood, Florida. A neighbor sued a neighbor over a rattling air conditioner, said, I can't sleep at night with this. And the judge ruled, we're going to have to get used to it. We're not going back where we used to be. Next, please. That you could, the prediction that you could spend a summer on a Florida beach, a Sanibel, a Captiva, without swatting mosquitoes. Mosquitoes were ravenous in Florida, especially anything near the coast, but inland as well. Stories abound of cattle suffocating in the interior because of swarms, black cloud swarms of mosquitoes clogging their nostrils. And the great breakthrough is World War II. This chemical called DDT is used in the South Pacific, but it's also used on the home front after the war for mosquito control. And it worked really well killing mosquitoes, but it also began taking a fearsome toll on bird life, especially ospreys, birds such as that. And Rachel Carson was researching her book in Florida on Captiva Island. She had a cottage there with a haunting title of her book, Silent Spring. In 1962, we banned DDT. Next, please. Someday, I predict in 1940, you'll be able to travel nonstop between Miami and Pensacola. Although everyone knows no one can travel nonstop through Orlando. The Interstate Highway project, in many ways a defense project, how President Eisenhower saw it as a way of quickly mobilizing American troops. In fact, when he was told that the interstate is being used by commuters to live in the suburbs and work in the cities, he was astonished. Well, you're not supposed to do that. But you also look at the toll interstate highways had. This is the infamous malfunction junction in Tampa, the morning before it opened. But look at all the ground underneath. That was all African American business district. And in Chicago, Tampa as well, Italian neighborhoods were uprooted. So it was a revolutionary act, but also a very damaging project. Next, please. I predict someday we'll be playing Major League Baseball, not spring training, but Major League Baseball inside an air-conditioned dome in St. Petersburg. You're kidding. No, no way. First of all, what's an air-conditioned dome would be the question in 1940. Now, we're not drawing a lot of fans. Tonight's a big game. It should be interesting. But there are two professional teams now in Miami as well. Next, please. In many ways, the post-1950s, 1960s environment was a massive shift to the Sun Belt, the word that didn't even exist in 1940. Kind of California to Florida, maybe to North Carolina. In this year's Stanley Cup, Tampa Bay won the Stanley Cup. It's the first time there were more two Sun Belt hockey teams, Dallas and Tampa, squared off for the Stanley Cup. But hockey in Florida, that makes no sense. Next. I predict that someday we'll put a man on the moon from a place called Cape Canaveral. Cape Canaveral in 1940 was one of the most isolated places in America. It actually is an ancient word. On Ponce de Leon's 1513 voyage of exploration, he noted I think it was Caña de Canaveral, the reeds in that area. But during World War II, there was a naval station, the Naval Air Station nearby on the Banana River. And when they were looking for a site, in large part, it was chosen in Volusia County, Cape Canaveral, because there were so few people there, which is hard to imagine today. But also rockets would land in the ocean. There was also something about magnetic location. But throughout the 1950s and the 1960s, Volusia County was one of the fastest growing places in America. Every week, several dozen new rocket scientists and their families, their overachieving children at Satellite High School, have remade Florida. Next. I predict in 1940, the Seminole Tribe was one of the poorest in Florida. I think it was, in fact, the poorest cohort in Florida. They were living off very small subsidies from the American government. They had made a kind of a transition from hunting, fishing to tourism, but there were relatively few tourists in 1940. There's Tamiami Trail. Alligator wrestling is one of these things anthropologists call an invented tradition. They invented this for tourists. The character there, by the way, that is maybe the most famous Seminole ever. Even and like Osceola, James Billy had an American father. Osceola had a Scottish trader father. There's one of my favorite stories involving James Billy. James Billy was in Vietnam, kind of rare for a Seminole Indian. And when he returns, to his astonishment, like 1971, 72, to his astonishment, he's elected chair of the Seminole Tribe, I think at age 30. And lacking confidence to lead the Seminoles into the modern era, he consulted a medicine man and asked, "What must I do to win the faith of my people?" And the medicine man said, "Son, you must first go out and capture, kill, and eat a Florida panther," which he proceeded to do. Was promptly arrested for killing an endangered species. He pleaded It was a religious purification ceremony on sovereign land, and in fact was acquitted in the trial of the century. And he's coming out of the courthouse. There are 200 journalists there. And what's the first question they asked? Yes, yes. What does panther taste like? And he replied, it tasted like a cross between bald eagle and manatee. Rim shot, please. I didn't hear the rim shot. Oh, thank you. Thank you. You're a wonderful audience. Drive home safely. Next, please. Okay, so this is the Mormino version of Jeopardy. Seemingly an easy question. What's the largest city on the Gulf Coast of Florida, south of Tampa and St. Petersburg? Is it, let's do a multiple choice question. Is it Bradenton, Sarasota, Naples, or Fort Myers? Or E, none of the above? And the answer is E, none of the above. The answer is Cape Coral in Lee County. Cape Coral did not even exist as a city until 1955, 56. Today it has, I think it just topped 200,000 people. By the way, it's not even close. Some of you probably guessed Sarasota. Sarasota is not the largest city in Sarasota County. It's Northport, another instant 1950s, 1960s city. What about on the East Coast? Largest city between Jacksonville and Fort Lauderdale. And many of you are saying Palm Bay, Palm Coast. It's Port St. Lucie, another instant city. Home of the New York Mets, I think. Spring training, the Cardinals, St. Louis Cardinals are nearby in Jupiter. But so Florida is a place where dreams come true for developers, and it was easier to do because of lack of environmental regulations. Next, please. Someday, I predict in 1940 that Florida will supplant New York in population. Are you kidding me? That is insane. I think New York in 1940 had 9 million more people than Florida. To put this in perspective, in 1940, on the eve of Pearl Harbor, Florida was the smallest state in the South. Florida had fewer residents than Arkansas or South Carolina. Seriously. And fewer than 1 million people in 1940. In 2014, we surpassed New York, and today we're on the lip of 22 million people, third largest state in America. I'm not bragging, by the way. There are actions have consequences. But you can see by this map here, this is a great map, Florida is in many ways kind of 12 states into one. You've got the Panhandle has, it's very southern, that's the historic areas. If you've never been on Highway 90A in the Panhandle, go and see these new urban communities, Seaside. It's a pretty amazing place. But Florida is kind of all things to all Americans. Lots of Jewish migrants on the East Coast, lots of Italians in Naples and Collier County. Midwesterners tended to migrate on the west coast of Florida, Easterners on the East Coast. Next, please. I was also going to predict something else. Okay, this is actually good here. So in 1940, I think this is the most interesting response you would have had in 1940. So in 1940, if I had gone to almost any Chamber of Commerce meeting, state governor's council, and asked, what's the greatest challenge in Florida? The answer would have been water. But in 1940, they met, there's too much water in Florida. Water's everywhere. How do we get rid of this damn water from the Everglades, et cetera? And in 2020, we're parched. There's a famous line, one of my colleagues, a biologist, used to say, I've got good and bad news about the future of water in Florida. the good news is that you'll have water to drink in 2025, but it's going to be generated from sewage water. The bad news is there won't be enough of it. Water, in fact, I don't think I have a slide here. I should have put another slide. So let's imagine an image. I wonder how many of you out there have visited Little Haiti in Miami. Little Haiti is one of the trendiest restaurant venues in South Florida now, particularly Haitian barbecue. Little Haiti, not long ago, was the poorest neighborhood in Miami-Dade. It's now the hottest real estate market. How can that be? And it has nothing to do with gentrification. Little Haiti rests upon the highest landmass in Miami. Next, please. The scars of development are everywhere in Florida. I love, I almost decided to do a slideshow on the history of the beach in Florida, how the beach has evolved. 200 years ago, the beach was mysterious. No one wanted to build on the water. Hurricanes will blow you away. There are sea creatures that will eat you out there. And besides, you really can't grow anything on barrier islands. Florida has some magnificent barrier islands, but they're sand and they're always shifting. But following World War II, Americans fell in love with the beach. And some very smart lawyer in the 1950s started wondering about this clause in many land deeds in Florida. And it mentioned the words riparian rights, R-I-P-A-R-I-A-N. And it goes back to the 19th century, I think it was called Land and Water Commission in Florida. But in order to promote what they called internal improvements, they gave anyone with land on the water the right to develop it. And they used that in the 1950s. It even started in the 40s. And they would dredge and fill coastal lands. And so see, at one time, there would have been probably about 10 building lots on this strip of land. By dredging and filling on this barrier island, you now have hundreds of lots. You've become a millionaire. That's the good news for that individual. The bad news for the community is you've completely ruined, this happens to be Boca Ciega Bay. Boca Ciega Bay, before dredge and fill, was one of the most fertile areas in Florida in terms of sea life and fishing yields. They create a sewer out of it. It's very sad. I've got a few more examples here next. Nature doesn't look like this, by the way. You can see that's just amazing. This is before anyone lived there. This is St. Petersburg. By 1960, you really couldn't do this anymore, or at least you had to have a lot of political economic influence. But this was, among environmental historians, this is just, equivalent to a nuclear fallout. Next, please. This is a fascinating picture. Some of you may know the photographer Clyde Butcher, who, fascinating story, he lost a son. It was just a family tragedy. And he found an 1860s camera with glass negatives, and kind of to redeem his son's memory, he started becoming the Florida's greatest nature photographer. And so I'm interviewing him, and this is one of his classic ones. I think he gave this original to Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. So what do you see in this photograph? Most people would see, wow, this is kind of an Everglades before humans ruined it. In fact, it's the opposite. This is the Everglades, the result of humans' footprint. This is not sawgrass. These are cattails. Cattails flourish when there's too much nitrogen and phosphorus in the waters. So this is his kind of moral parable about the future of the Everglades. Next. There's a huge battle going on in Florida Fort Walton Beach is up near Seaside, the place I mentioned. It's in Walton County. There's a big military base in Okaloosa County next to it, Eglin base. Eglin is where, by the way, the Doolittle's bombers and the mission over Tokyo trained. And anyway, this is where, let me give you kind of both sides of this. From a property rights line, I paid a lot of money for my beach. And I don't want people picnicking in front of my yard on the beach shore. And the Florida legislature actually agreed with this under Governor Scott, and they passed a law that if there's no history of beach access, you have the right to fence off your property on the beach. The opposite view is the beach belongs to everyone. It's kind of an ancient law. I have the right to walk in front of your beachfront property as from the water's edge to the dune's edge. I don't have the right to picnic in your front yard. But this is still up in the air legally where this is going. But it's a flashpoint issue in Florida, particularly. I think this may be Governor Huckabee's property. He's the Governor Huckabee of Arkansas lives on Fort Walton Beach, I believe, and he's the one who instigated the lawsuit. Next, please. This is probably everyone's perfect image of the beach. In fact, the title of the book I wrote was had the word Florida Dream in it. And let me talk a little bit about the Florida Dream. This is kind of the picture postcard for that there's something, let me put it this way. If you're in North Dakota today, I don't think there's a historian talking to the retired foreign service people about the North Dakota Dream or the Delaware Dream. There's something about California and Florida that if you have hundreds of miles of beachfront and you have swaying palm trees, it's also the promise of a second chance, or at least a better February. And that's the Florida Dream. And it's really important, that idea of the second chance. So retirees can come here after long winters in Minnesota and have the Florida Dream. Florida Dream is kind of tarnished these days. I know there were a few questions about the future, and I promise I'll try to take a stab at that. Next, please. Here's the father of the Florida Dream is Kevin Starr. If any of you are living in California, Kevin Starr died about a year or two ago, did about 5 books about the California Dream. And by the way, I should add, his last book was kind of pessimistic, and that was done like 15 years ago. And I have similar anxieties. You fall in love with your subject. I really love Florida, but I'm really worried about the direction of Florida, where we're going, particularly with climate change looming, overdevelopment. It's kind of the petri dish. And in some ways, Florida is the petri dish for America, that things that happen are really important, often begin in Florida. Next, please. Let me kind of finish this and open all sorts of questions. I have another book that's coming out on Florida from 2000 to 2010. It's kind of a sequel, the last book. And I begin the book December 31st, 1999, the Y2K. And if you remember, everyone was predicting computers would all fail, prison gates would open, the vending machines would spew out dollar bills. None of this really happened, but who could have imagined 2000 would be such a crazy year from January to December. Although what's fascinating, by the way, several things about December 31st, 1999 in Florida. The biggest party, private party, was held at Mar-a-Lago. And several newspapers described Donald Trump as a, quote, presidential wannabe. So already in 2000, he was being mentioned, but he promised his Florida, the party was going to be tremendous. It was also very expensive to go there, by the way. And the biggest gathering was at the Miccosukee gambling casino in Broward County. So imagine the Miccosukee, this tribe that was almost went extinct in the 19th century, 3 Seminole wars. Seminoles and Miccosukees are separated by a language. They each speak a different dialect, but Miccosukees are also a national tribe recognized. But that they had a big concert there. I think the Fish, PHISH, were playing there. Next, please. So look at kind of a portrait of Florida in 2000. 15.3 million people. 20 years later, we've added over 5 million people. What the great question in Florida, the unanswered question is, what is the breaking point? I often ask groups, at what point will Americans say, I used to love Florida when I was a kid and my grandparents would take me to Collier County and you could walk miles without meeting anyone. And Florida today, they would claim it's too crowded, too many immigrants, too much traffic, too many Yankees, too many rednecks, it's already, though, you were seeing the Florida of the future. The idea that 51% of Floridians would be women would have been unthinkable 100 years earlier, when you had, it was the other way around. You had fewer women because so many women were still dying in childbirth. It's maybe the most astonishing is that almost 1 in 5 Floridian in 2000 was 65 and older. It's now 1 in 5. It's now 20%. If you think about where does this fit in history, it doesn't fit in history. There's never been a society where you had, in a place like Florida, where you have more people 65 and older than 18 and younger. Most societies throughout history had lots of young people and young adults and relatively few people in their 60s. There are counties in Florida, there are more people 75 and older than 18 and younger. I'm thinking of Charlotte County, Pasco, I think, there. The title of my chapter is Old Folks at Home. I'm a senior citizen now, I'm 73, but I just find old age in Florida fascinating. Most interesting old age community I went to, that's not a proper term, was, have you ever been to Penny Farms in Clay County, I believe. It's if you know where Camp Blanding is, and it's about 30 minutes northeast of Gainesville, near Starr. And J.C. Penney built it for his father, who was a retired missionary, no, a retired pastor. And only retired pastors and missionaries can retire at Penny Farms. Lots of Democrats, old people on the East Coast, lots of Republicans on the East Coast. Also, for you all, this would be huge. Almost 1 in 5 Floridians in 2000 was a Hispanic or a Latino. Almost 1 million Cubans. The Big Bang in Florida, you could argue, happened December 31st, 1958, when Fulgencio Batista abdicated and Fidel Castro and his Barbudos took over. I mean, the ramifications of that are still being found. If you think of the succeeding events almost in rapid succession, expropriation of American property in Cuba, the embargo, the sugar embargo, The boats, the boats leaving for Miami and airlines, that first generation was largely well-educated, upper middle classes. October 1962, the crisis, maybe the most existential crisis in our lifetime. Florida's only 90 miles from Cuba. So if you want to study immigrants, Florida is a good place to be. The fastest growing immigrant group in Florida is Puerto Rican. If you lived in Central Florida, Orlando or Kissimmee, Osceola County, you won't be surprised at all. Huge, surging. The fourth largest group is interesting. I bet if I asked you to name the top 10, you could get all but one. The fourth largest group in Florida is Colombian. Joe Biden was just in South Florida addressing Colombians in Miami recently. What Florida doesn't have that the West Coast would have is a huge Asian population. And that's obvious geographic factors. Next, please. No study of Florida would be complete without the happiest place on earth. This is a great story, worthy of a play or a movie. So the couple on the right, they kind of look like your great-grandparents. That's Elias Disney and Flora Call on their, I don't know if that's their wedding picture, but soon thereafter. They were the first couple married in Lake County, Florida, which is where Mount Dora, Tavares is. And if you go to Tavares, the county seat, and you ask for the oldest wedding certificate in Lake County, they bring out this volume for you, and it's this couple here. They're married, I think, in 1889, and they homesteaded on a piece of property they called Kismet, a Turkish word meaning destiny. And as fate would have it, the freezes of the 1890s drove them out, and they landed in Chicago, where Walt and Roy were born. But fearing that Chicago would corrupt his sons, they moved to Marceline, Missouri, this rather remote place in north central Missouri, where Walt really had his kind of Huckleberry Finn experience. And I wish we had, I could see your hands, but the question I asked this audience is, who among us has not been to Disney World or Disneyland? I'm betting if you have grandkids, this is a question almost every audience, every hand is raised. And then if there's not, I say I can also see the future. All of you have been to Disney World. No, I'm sorry. I asked the question, how many of you have been to Marceline, Missouri? And no hands go up. And I said, yes, you have. Marceline, Missouri is Main Street Disney. That's Walt's kind of memories of his childhood in Marceline, Missouri. More people have visited Disney World and Disneyland than there are Chinese today. Next. We could skip this other than Jeb Bush is the governor of Florida in 2000. So I'm going to end with this dramatic story. Next, please. What's interesting, everyone expected in the year 2000 that one of the Bush brothers would run for president, but everyone assumed it was going to be Jeb. Jeb was the smart one. George was not nearly as serious an egghead as George had some baggage, but in one of the great upsets, George Bush, W. Bush, defeats Ann Richards of Texas for governor in 1998, and Jeb loses to Lawton Chiles. So it's going to be W who steps forward to carry the family tradition. Next, please. Do I need? We can kind of skip this, but yeah, let's skip this, please. So in 2000, it's 1999, early 2000. it's Bill Clinton's last year in office. And the event, the preceding, and one of the events that will, at the time, I don't think anyone thought would have momentum, next slide please, is Elian Gonzalez. In 1999, Elian's mother takes her young son out of school, not telling her husband, whom she's estranged, and they join a raft, and the raft collapses off the coast of Florida, and only Elian and I think one or two other people survived. Elian's mother did not. And in Miami, this is seen as almost a religious divine, that the patron saint of Cuba is La Caridad del Cobre, who rescued Cubans on a little boat 400 years earlier, and the battle lines are drawn, and most historians and political scientists believe it's the decision to repatriate Elian that cost Al Gore the election. Janet Reno gave the order. Ironically, Janet Reno was from Miami. She thought, this is one of those issues you're going to get no consensus. I love my son so much that I want to send him to America so he can enjoy liberty, but I'll never see him again. I hate well, anyway, we'll move on for where I'm running out of time. So next, please. Next. Or is that next? Is that the end? Hello, can you hear me? Larry, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Gary. I assume that's the end, unless Rebecca comes back and tells us.
I'd be happy to take questions. Should I look at her chat?
Yeah, let me just say a couple of things. First of all, Gary, thanks for an absolutely fascinating presentation. I want to remind the participants that you can submit written questions if you just scroll down to the very bottom of the screen. There's a little dialog box that says Q&A. You just click on that and then type in your question. And we have a few questions here that we'll be asking. But Gary, did you want to say anything else more about this remaining slide or two?
Yeah, everyone, this is one of the most iconic photographs from the 2000 election from Palm Beach County, trying to find dangling chads. How many of you have ever heard of a chad before? And then the next question, there's a question about Longboat Key. Could you go to the next slide, please? Well, George W. Bush wins the election largely because of Mariel and the support of Miami Cubans. Next, please. There's a couple more images I want to get to. Catherine Harris wins the day for the Republicans in Florida. Next, please. So this is the most, if you were doing a novel or a movie, this would make a tremendous opening plot for 9/11. So Longboat Key is one of the loveliest places in the world, begun by a Swiss guy, Murray Klauber, with his machete, literally cleaning the palmetto scrub from there. And from the 1980s to 2000, it was a renowned tennis resort and also famous for its food. And next, please. And so I'm interviewing Mary Jane and Bob Martinez. Bob Martinez was the governor of Florida, first Hispanic governor, first Catholic governor of Florida. And as I'm leaving the house, Mary Jane pointed to this frame menu. It was the menu served. There was this historic dinner in 2001. Governors, presidents there, Tex-Mex cuisine. And as Governor Martinez is leaving, President Bush said, would you like me to sign the menu for Mary Jane? And he had a kind of a crush on Mary Jane. He puts a heart there. As I'm leaving, Mary Jane said, look at the date, 9/10/01. So the evening before 9/11 was this famous dinner. And of course, the next day, next slide, please. Next slide, please, I'm sorry. This is another iconic photograph. President Bush is reading The Pet Goat to students at Booker Elementary School in Sarasota. And that's his assistant whispering in his ear that the second plane has crashed into the World Trade Center. And the Florida connections there, many of the conspirators learned to fly or lived in Florida, which if you think about it is a perfect place. If you don't want to be noticed, go to a place where everyone is from somewhere else, such as South Florida or Southwest Florida. There was a question about the future of Florida, which is interesting. First of all, there's so many unpredictables. You don't know about the next foreign crisis in the Caribbean or the Americas. Who knows if there were a disastrous hurricane in Haiti again. Things can change so quickly. But I think it's pretty obvious Florida is going to be more diverse. You're going to have more foreign born. You're going to have more religious diversity. The number one religion in Florida is Roman Catholicism. In 1920, I think it was 8th, to put this in perspective. And there's another statistic that's even more fascinating. If you took the number of lapsed Catholics and created a new religion, that would be the second largest religion in Florida. So you're going to have more diverse religious experience. So much of it depends upon politics. Will we try to resist development? First of all, development doesn't pay for itself. I'm not a big development guy. Now, some of you may say, well, yeah, you came here, true. But I think Floridians are going to have to really consider the future. I'm kind of old-fashioned. I was taught you should leave the world a better place than you found it. And we're not doing this. The last successive number of generations have not done this. And I think we need a reckoning and more public dialogue about climate. The other big factor is water. If water continues to be a precious resource, Florida's in trouble. And the consequences of global warming for a place with a shoreline like Florida. In Miami, some of you may think, well, you just put up a big wall in Miami, a seawall. It won't work in Miami. The water in Miami, because of the limestone undergird, will come up under the wall and on the other side. That's why Little Haiti is hot property these days. Any other questions? Should I go to my chat box?
There is a question, Dr. Mormino. I think Larry's going to be handling that.
Yes. Yeah, again, once again, thanks for a fascinating presentation. I have a couple of questions here. One is that, as you mentioned, Florida is a place that has benefited from rapid growth from transplants, immigration, et cetera, over the last 50 or 60 years. But now we see second, third, fourth, or more generation Floridians. How is that changing Florida? Does that affect a Florida culture? And where do you see that? Where do you see that going?
You know, what's interesting, that is a fascinating question. So 150 years ago, the word for someone whose family has been here many generations was cracker. Now, some people would regard that as offensive, most would not, and it's sometimes capitalized. It had to do with cattlemen driving their cattle into Florida and with the crack of a whip. So it's kind of onomatopoeic. There are other speculations, but today, anyone who's been here more than 30 days is a cracker. least any white person, but I've even now it's multi-ethnic, multi-racial. But there's still not a feeling. The question implies is, will people who have been here many generations, you would assume they would love the state and want to resist development. And I think that's true. The problem is they are greatly outnumbered by newcomers. Today, again, as it was in 2003, about 1,000 new Floridians arrive every day. And probably more than that die every day of people in Florida. And the birth rate is relatively low in Florida. So for the unknown future, newcomers are going to outnumber old stock Floridians for a long time. They probably have more clout. The Great Recession was a sobering dose of reality. It used to be the theory before 2006 was, well, for instance, a cover of Florida Trend, the state business magazine, said in 2006, a life in the day of Florida. And they said every single day, 1,700 new people arrive in Florida. 1,700 arrive. That's, by the way, probably that many from Illinois and New York are leaving for Florida. But it was also interesting in 2006, 700 were leaving. Florida's too hot for too long, too much traffic. And I always thought there should be a license plate for expats. It would say Florida. It's not what I thought it would be. But no one, as long as 1,000 newcomers came every day, Florida hummed. Taxes, newcomers would pay for laundry, people, and all their services. No one ever quite asked the question, what's going to happen if 1,000 people don't come? And we found out in the Great Recession, Florida took a beating. And if the only salvation is 1,000 newcomers a day, we really need, I think, to rethink what we want Florida to be. Now, you're not going to get this from this Florida legislature. It's a very conservative legislature. It's growth oriented, but there's a battle shaping up over this. Any final questions or thoughts?
Yeah, I've got two questions from our attendees. The first is from Dennis Reese. He's asking, how are Italian immigrants different between St. Louis and Ybor City?
Oh man, the moon, Earth and moon, Venus and Mars. First of all, most of the immigrants in St. Louis were Lombards from northern Italy. Speaking a Lombard dialect, you had a small percentage of Sicilians there. And anyone who's been to Italy realizes northern Italians do not cherish southern Italians, those from the Mezzogiorno. They're darker. Morminos are Sicilian. In fact, the Mormino family story is my grandfather and grandmother from Sicily left. They cut sugar in Napoleonville, Louisiana, and they came to settle briefly on the hill in St. Louis. And the Lombards ran them out. And they crossed the river into this oil refinery town. So the Lombards were, whereas in Tampa, and in St. Louis, the hill was 100% Italian. In Tampa, the Italians were about 20% of the immigrants in Tampa. The other 80% in Ybor City in West Tampa were Spaniards and Cubans, black and white Cubans, the Afro-Cubans. By the way, Afro-Cubans and Sicilians and Spaniards kind of lived close to one another. Ybor City was, first of all, a very radical place in terms of politics. St. Louis was very conservative. You had a flourishing anarchist community in Tampa among the Sicilians and especially Spaniards. Most of them worked in the cigar factories. One of the greatest stories in Tampa history in terms of, if you wanted to study why it's so distinct, the cigar makers, the Los Tabaqueros, hired someone called El Lector to read to them. And they paid him, they selected him and paid him, occasionally her, occasionally in Italian. All the Italians spoke Spanish. Spanish was the lingua franca in Ybor City. And that tradition lasted until 1931 of the Los Lectores. I interviewed the last reader, I think in 1981, he was still alive. So you couldn't have selected two more disparate Italian immigrant communities than St. Louis. By the way, the St. Louis Hill still thrives today if you've ever been there, whereas Ybor City is pretty much a tourist community now. Very few Italian, Spaniards, or Cubans live in Ybor City anymore.
Great. Gary, we have one more question from Ellen Ingalls. She's asking, the percentage of Hispanics, about 17%, and Blacks, which is about 13 to 14% in Florida in 2000, is reflective of the percentages in the overall US population today. What are these percentages in Florida today?
Well, the percentage of Hispanics, and both Hispanics and elderly, is about 20% now. So they've risen dramatically from 2000. The other percentage was African American. The African American percentage, for the first time in 40 or 50 years, is rising. Not much. You have to put this in historical perspective. In 1840, there were more slaves in Florida than free whites. As late as 1880, the population of Florida was about 48% Black. And it was down to about 12, 13%. So many, it's a combination of two factors. African Americans leaving Florida for better opportunities in the North during the Great Migration after World War I. And secondly, so many more white Floridians arriving in Florida from the Midwest, from the Northeast. So among Southern states, Florida is has the lowest Black population in Florida. It also has the most diverse Black population. You have obviously Black immigrants from Dominican Republic, Cuba, places such as that. Americans were kind of astonished at the Mariel boat lift, that so many of the refugees were Afro-Cuban, but that's simply because most of the early migrations tended to be the more educated upper class elements.
Gary, one final question, and then we'll bring Mike back on in a moment. You've mentioned a lot of the challenges that face us in Florida, going ahead: ecology, the climate change, overcrowding, transportation issues, and things like that. What do you think are the greatest opportunities for Florida?
I'm glad you asked that, because when you were phrasing, I was saying, I'm much too negative. I think I love Florida. Nothing quite like going to the beach in Florida, the sunset, the ecology of Florida. To see a natural spring is a marvel of nature. The opportunity, I mean, wow. The opportunities in kind of ecological research. One of the real problems we've had the last 20 years is blue-green algae blooms. Surely there's someone out there, rocket scientists, who could address this. I think opportunities there are so many Floridians who come here to retire who I don't think ever get engaged. So I'm very involved with a group called Florida Humanities. It's part of the National Endowment for Humanities. So we send speakers out to talk about Florida authors, Florida art. I should add, the last 2 years, the Florida legislature, for the first time, defunded us. So we only get our money from the National Endowment for Humanities. So, but I think the greatest opportunity is talking to new Floridians about what an astonishingly interesting place this is, and to become Floridians rather than simply a retiree in Florida. There's a famous line during the Italian Risorgimento, an Italian legislator thundered, "We have made Italy. Now we must make Italians." And we've made a modern Florida with 21 million people. How do we make Floridians who really care about the place, who want to leave it better than they've found it?
Great, thank you. Mike, let me turn it back over to you if you'd like to say a few words and close out the event.
Sure, I would. Dr. Mormino, this was absolutely fascinating, as I expected it to be. And thank you to Larry for finding you and to have you speak to us. I mean, I could listen to you for another hour with all kinds of aspects. You know, we've had speakers talk about Florida politics. We've had speakers talk about climate change and the fact that, you know, in 100 years, we're all going to be underwater, but that's for another time and another date. So thank you so much. I have to say personally, I was disappointed to see that Stanley Schrager has left the room. I last saw Stanley Schrager at a barbecue by our swimming pool in Kinshasa, which was called then Zaire, in roughly 1977 or so. And with his wife, and the other couple we had were Ken and Carol Edelman. And Ken Edelman went on to be the head of the Arms Control and Disarmament Agency under, I believe, President Reagan. And Carol Edelman became a very high-ranking person within USAID. So I'll have to look up Stan from the directory. I didn't realize he was even a member. So that's one little personal anecdote. So again, thank you very much. And everybody that's still participating, the recording will be available in about 48 hours after we close out today. Okay, again, thank you all.
All right, everyone, this is going to conclude today's webinar. As Mike said, we should have that recording up in approximately 48 hours, and it will be downloadable from the cloud. Thank you so much for being here.
Okay.
I think it will be downloadable and available through a link on our website. Is that correct, Rebecca?
I will do that as well.
Yeah.
But an email will go out to all participants, whether you attended or not, the registrants,
Okay.
with the recording.
Okay, good. All right. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
See you. Thanks again. My best.